Possibilities by Wislawa Szymborska. Possibilities is a beautiful poem penned by Wislawa Szymborska. This poem is noted for its simplicity and directness. So now let's get an introduction about the poet. Maria Wislawa Anna Szymborska was a Polish poet, essayist, translator and recipient of 1996 Nobel Prize in Literature. Wislawa was born on 2nd July 1923 in Kornik, Poland. She was born in Poland, that's why she was known as a Polish poet. She was awarded with Nobel Prize in 1996 for literature. Szymborska frequently employed literary devices like ironic precision, paradox, contradiction, and understatement. These were implemented to illuminate philosophical themes and obsessions. Many of her poems feature war and terrorism. In 1991, she was awarded with Gothe Prize. Later, on 2012 February 1st, she died of lung cancer in Krakow, Poland. So this particular poem, Possibilities, indicates the numerous possibilities that life offers us. So this poem mainly deals with the possibilities that our life offers us. Poet uses repetition in this poem in order to emphasize the purpose of the poem. In short, the repetition helped the message of the poem in reaching out to all the readers. The main message of this poem is that we have to sacrifice a lot while making a decision or a choice, and we may even lose the possibilities that life offers us while making our own choices. In short, our life offers us various choices, and it's our duty to make a selection out of it. And everything relating to our choice will come under our responsibility because it is we who decide. So we might have to sacrifice a lot while making our own selection or choice. So while making choices or while turning to something, we are just turning away from many other things. So all these elements are included in this particular poem. So now let's get into the chapter. I prefer movies. I prefer cats. I prefer the oaks along the water. I prefer Dickens to Dostoevsky. I prefer myself liking people to myself loving mankind. So here, the poet begins the poem by preferring to movies. There are various other visual forms, but her preference is movies. And here, she prefers cats. There are various other animals, domesticated animals, but what she prefers is cat. I prefer the oaks along the water. So water is a river in central Poland. So there are many other trees along the riverside. But what she prefers is the oak trees beside the banks of river water. And she prefers Charles Dickens, than Dostoevsky. So as we know, Dickens was an English novelist and Dostoevsky was a Russian novelist. And he was famous for his work Crime and Punishment. So among these two novelists, what she prefers is Charles Dickens. I prefer myself liking people to myself loving mankind. So here the poet says that instead of being a person who loves mankind, she prefers to be a person who likes individual people and she wants to be loved by others. So, rather than loving mankind in general, she loves individual people. I prefer keeping a needle and thread on hand just in case. I prefer the color green. I prefer not to maintain that reason is to blame for everything. I prefer exceptions. I prefer to leave early. I prefer keeping a needle and thread on hand just in case. So here the poet, she likes to be cautious. That means she likes to take precautions. Needle and thread symbolizes a kind of precaution. which we would take usually in case of emergency. So rather than running in time of emergency, she likes to take precautions. Her preferred color is green. There are many other colors, but her preference is green. I prefer not to maintain that reason is to blame for everything. So here the poet says that she does not depend on reasons to blame whatever happened. She does not want to use reasons. It simply means that the poet does not want to use reasons to blame everything that happens around her or to blame everyone around her. So she doesn't depend on reasons. She herself takes the responsibilities for her own mistakes. I prefer exceptions. So here exception means a person or a thing which is excluded in general. So normally we don't follow exceptions. We normally choose what is most preferred, but here the poet likes to choose exceptions. The person or a thing which is excluded in general. I prefer to leave early. So here the poet prefers to leave early. She doesn't want to stay late. I prefer talking to doctors about something else. So we usually approach a doctor to get a solution for our own diseases or to cure our ailments, about the medicines, about our disease, etc. So these are the matters that we usually talk to a doctor. But the poet does not prefer this. So apart from all these ailments and disease matters, the poet wants to talk to a doctor something else rather than diseases and ailments. So she preferred to talk to a doctor about something else rather than about diseases, ailments, medicines, etc. I prefer old fine lined illustrations. So here the poet likes to prefer old paintings or old illustrations. So rather than choosing modern illustrations or modern art, what she prefers is old illustrations. I prefer the absurdity of writing poems to the absurdity of not writing poems. So both these statements claimed by the poet are absurd or unreasonable. So here the poet says that she prefers the absurdity or the foolishness of writing a poem rather than to prefer the foolishness or absurdity of not writing a poem. So she prefers the absurdity of writing poem. I prefer where's love concerned non-specific anniversaries that can be celebrated every year. So usually we all wait for an anniversary or a party to come in order to celebrate. So we usually celebrate during a party or during an anniversary. But the poet does not prefer that. She is being related everything to love. So if we are trying to establish our love for someone whom we love, that's the better time to celebrate. So according to the poet, when we are establishing our love for someone, that's the time we should celebrate, rather than waiting a particular day for celebration. We should celebrate every moment of our life, rather than waiting for a particular day to celebrate. The poet does not prefer that. She does not wait for a particular day to come. I prefer moralist, who promise me nothing. So here moralist means people who teach or promotes morality. So the poet prefer moralist who promise her nothing. So if we make a promise, we should keep it, or else to the one whom we promised will feel bad. So here the poet prefers moralist because they doesn't even made any promise to the poet. So as the moralist has not made any promise to the poet, she prefer the moralist. I prefer cunning kindness to the over trustful kind. So here the poet prefers cunning or deceptive or untrustworthy people rather than trustworthy people. If we believe a cunning or an untrustworthy person, we can assume that one day they will deceive us or cheat us. But if we trust a person blindly, we might feel really hurt when they deceive us. We feel really bad or hurt when a trustful person cheats us. That's why the poet says that rather than believing or rather than preferring a trustful person, it's better to prefer a cunning person. I prefer earth in civis. Here, civis means civilian clothes. It simply means uniform. I prefer conquered to conquering countries. So here the poet says that she prefer or she liked the conquered countries rather than the conquering countries. So the poet loves the countries who are actually conquered rather than the countries who are conquering others. I prefer having some reservations. So the poet liked to have some reservations against people, community, society, everything. So she liked to have some reservation against everything in her mind. I prefer the hell of chaos to the hell of order. So here what she mentioned are both hell. Both the hell of chaos and the hell of order means one meaning, that is hell. So simply she claims that she prefer hell rather than heaven. What she prefer is hell. Both the hell of chaos and hell of order means hell. I prefer Grimm's fairy tales to the newspaper's front page. So we all are familiar with Grimm's fairy tales. Grimm's fairy tale is a collection of fairy tales and it is written by Jacob and William Grimm. So she prefers such fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, rather than reading the headings of the newspaper. So rather than newspaper reading, what she prefers is reading a fairy tale. I prefer leaves without flowers to the flowers without leaves. So in a plant, what attracts everyone is a flower. Leaf does not attract everyone. Everyone will be attracted to the beautiful flower of a plant. Even though a flower has leaves, what everyone sees is a flower. But the poet does not agree with it. Rather than loving a flower in a plant, what she loves or prefers is leaves. She prefers leaves without flowers. So everyone loves or everyone prefers flowers with leaves. But what the poet here prefers is leaves without any flowers. I prefer dogs with uncropped tails. So a dog's tail is cut or cropped for many purposes. A dog's tail is used for therapeutic purpose, cosmetic purpose, etc. But here the poet says that she prefers a dog with a fully grown tail. So she doesn't prefer a dog with a cropped tail. What she prefers is a fully grown tailed dog. She loves the dog who has a fully grown beautiful tail. I prefer light eyes since mine are dark. So here the poet says that as her eyes are dark, she prefers light eyes. I prefer desk drawers. I prefer many things that I haven't mentioned here. So here the poet says that she prefers many things, but here she is not mentioning everything. In short, she had made many decisions or choices in her life, but she is not mentioning all. So I prefer many things that I haven't mentioned here. Too many things I have also left unsaid. So here she said that she prefers many things, but here she is not mentioning all. She has left some. I prefer zeros on the loose to those lined up behind a cipher. So cipher means a code or figures that we use to do a mathematical expression. So in a cipher or the figures which we use to do a mathematical expression, what she prefers is zero. So the poet prefers zeros among the figures that we use to do a mathematical expression. Her preferred figure is zero. I prefer the time of insects to the time of stars. So here the time of insects means the twilight. It simply means the time between day and night. That is twilight time. It is the time of insects. So rather than preferring the time of stars, that is night, what she prefers is the time of insect, that is the twilight. In short, the poet says that rather than preferring night, what she prefers is twilight time, that is the time between day and night. I prefer to knock on wood. I prefer not to ask how much longer and when. I prefer keeping in mind even the possibility that existence has its own reason for being. So she concludes the poem with a beautiful message. So the last four lines of this poem deals with a beautiful message of life. So through the concluding lines of the poem, the poet says that there is a reason for our existence. Apart from all the problems that surround us, there is a reason for our existence and we should find that. She even says that there might be some purpose to our life and that purpose gives meaning to our existence. So our most prominent duty is to find the purpose of our life. Then only our life become meaningful. So everyone's life have certain purpose. So we should find that, thereby making our life meaningful. So here there's a particular tone for this poem. Here the poet always chooses the old ones rather than the popular one. She always prefer the old ones. Most people like to prefer or like to choose the preferred ones. But here the poet chose the old ones. That's the main tone of the poem. Through this poem, the poet reveals that everyone has the right to choose and it's their own decision and we don't even have the right to question them. So throughout the poem, the word I prefer is repeated. It is used simply to state the speaker's preferences. Also, the repetition is used to show how she had sacrificed in order to make her decision. And the most important fact of this poem is the poet prefers everything that others might ignore. So she prefers the things which are ignored by others. As I said earlier, she prefers the old ones, which are mostly ignored by others. So that's all about the poem. I hope this video would be helpful for you. Thank you.